Good morning and a Freilich and Chanukah. Continuing our journey, Hemshech Samach Vov. And as we've been dedicating it all week to the events that happened just last Sunday night in Sydney, Australia, we're honoring and dedicating this class to the Kedoshim, the 15 souls that were taken from us, Rabbi Eli Schlenger, Rabbi Yaakov, Levitan, and many others, men, women, and children. And may our learning be in their merit and for some healing to their shattered families, as well as to those injured in hospitals and still need a full, complete refuah shleima. So we are on Chanukah, and we are in Hemshech Samach Vov. We are on page 17. It's the second discourse of 61 discourses. This is a Hemshech. It's a one long flow that consists of 61 different maimorim that go from topic to topic. And we are in the middle. The central theme of Samach Vav is Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei, meaning the power of our initiated and self-generated Aveda work from below and what it accomplishes, which of course is the center of all of life, why we're here, the very purpose of existence, and what we accomplish through our hard-earned efforts and our difficult Aveda in dealing with the darkness of this world and transforming it into Adira B'Tachtenim. To understand that well, the Rebbe Rashab, in the classic style, lays out the entire groundwork and the foundations and the underpinnings, if you wish, in a comprehensive fashion to understand the whole Seder Shtalshalos and to therefore come to understand what we accomplished. The best way to contrast it is by talking about how first God created existence, including Gan Eden, which is a special place in existence itself that has a deeper divine revelation, and yet it's all still a reflection of the divine pleasure. And that's what the pasuk says. The Gan Eden is being irrigated by the Nahar, a river coming from Eden. But we want access to Eden itself, not just to the river and to the garden. But that does not in any way minimize the power of those revelations, because basically in the Neshamis in Gan Eden, we're talking about the greatest Neshamis in all of history, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Avis, Adam, Chava, and so on. All that's where they began in Gan Eden, and that's where their Neshamis are right now. So we're discussing now in detail, somewhat, if you want, quote unquote, the geography of Gan Eden, based on the verses in Beriyah of how the Gan Eden was created, and again, specifically, namely the Eden, the river that flows from it, and the garden that it irrigates. Then comes Adam, the human being, placed in the garden, and that refers to each one of us. And our job is to obviously cause the garden to grow far more, much more than it has on its own, even from the level of Hashem Elikim, and even more so to create even new energies, unprecedented energies that are even beyond the Eirei Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. So all this is really coming to understand and appreciate our work. But to get there, we have to understand what is going on in existence prior to our Aveda, or what is going on today. And La'asad Lave will be this level of Eden, Ayin Loi Rasa, that today is imperceptible. And beyond us will ultimately be revealed in full glory. But we're right now in the middle of the discussion of Gan Eden, and the last thing we've been learning is Gan Eden, the Eden is Chochma, Pnimi is Chochma, which is connected to the unadulterated, pure, seamless, what he calls Tainuk HaPoshet HaAtzmi, the core concealed pleasure that's beyond, which manifests within Pnimi is Chochma, that's Eden. Binah, or the river that flows from Eden, is Binah, Machshava, that develops Chochma into a flow, that flows through Malchus into Biyah, namely Beriyah. Beriyah is Gan Eden Elyon, which is irrigated by this river. So even though it's coming directly from Chochma, but it's coming already through a river, and we already learned that the river does conceal to some extent, just like speech conceals, so does thought, but it's still a river that's flowing from Chochma. In the last section, he went further and said, but Gan Eden is still a gili from Atzilus. It's just through Binah of Atzilus. It's not pure Chochma, it's Chochma coming through Binah. Like he said, that even though gili Atzilus, it's Mimchinas Binah. And that itself is a big achievement. So then we learn what's the achievement of that? What is the accomplishment? How is that greater than regular Beriyah of that flows from Atzilus, that receives from Atzilus? She explained that the river itself also has two stages. There's the single river as it flows from Eden, the Nor Yotza Me Eden, Yotza, like he says, Yetza Me Eden, Bli Pirud Vehefsik. It's one single river. Then that's the way that's what Gan Eden receives. But then the river splits into four. And that is already how it comes down into Beriyah. So now there's already Pirud. And he made it clear, Pirud does not mean necessarily Pirud of Klippa, divisiveness as in conflict, but Pirud means structure, that there's four, not one. So in Gan Eden, what radiates is the oneness of Hashem, of godliness that comes from Chochma. And in Beriyah in general, what radiates is more the structures beginning to develop. That's the four. And he brought proof for this from a Zohar, on end of Parsha Noach, but the Zohar asked that question. It says, on one hand, it says, Benor Yetza, one river, but then it says, Masham Yaparid. So the Zohar explains that both are correct. When it comes downward and it receives, it then breaks into four. But the way it's, but in the state when it's still absorbing from its source, then it's one singular river. And the commentary, the Zohar explains that this is the four is referring to the Dal Machna Shechina, which is not necessarily Pirud Legamri. It's not necessarily. It's not Pirud Legamri. It's like the separation of the wings, that the wings spread out, so the wings are also. So it says Kanfei and Predis. They separate, and it refers to Ava and Yira, love and reverence, but they're distinct. They're distinct from one another. And he's compared it also to the Metzoyes Hapeh, the gutturals, the 5 different ways we articulate sound. They break down the seamless voice, which is just a sound, into specific expressions. That's what he said in the parentheses. That's brought from the Maimon Likutei Torah. But then there's a level, Upaneim She'enim Predis, a level that it's all unified. The Emasai, there's the Zohar Chamakah, that when it's received, when it's exiting, as the river flows downward into Beriyah, then it does separate. But when they're still connected to the Shechina, they're Ein Nifradim, they're all as one. And that's where we stopped. Run halfway down page 17. So basically, we've now established something further in the Nor itself, 2 stages, and Gan Eden is a higher level of the revelation. But we're going to obviously learn it's still Gan Eden, it's still not what we achieved through Avodah. This is all the way God set it up, because the rivers is all part of the creation of the world and the creation of Gan Eden. So I'm going to continue reading from the line that begins with Zeu Yisrin de Gan Eden on page 17. It's around, 6, 9, around 11 lines from the top of page 17. Pages can be found at samachvov.com if you want to follow along. So here we go. V'zehu hayisrin de Gan Eden. And now we'll understand the uniqueness and the supremacy, if you wish, the higher level of Gan Eden, compared obviously to Beriyah in general and to existence in general. Diksiv bei v'nor yetze, and then it doesn't say v'hishka, but it says esagat. The river flowed from, or the river flowed from Eden and into the garden. Because remember, Gan Eden is receiving from the river is Binah. Binah receives from Chochma. So, but this is how Binah is united with Chochma. Not as Binah comes down lower through Malchus and Beriyah, where it separates into four different rivers, four different channels or tracks. This is how Binah is miyuchedes b'Chochma. V'zeu shebegan Eden meir gili Atzilus. So now he goes back to the beginning of the paragraph at the bottom of last page, where he qualified. He said, didn't we say earlier that Gan Eden receives from Atzilus? He says, yeah, that's the point. Not just receives from Binah of Atzilus, it's actually receiving from the unity of Atzilus. The Atzilus Abba Eloah Mekanno. In Atzilus, who nests in Atzilus is Abba Eloah, Chochma. Supernal Abba, the Father, Chochma. Ulechem b'Atzilus v'nor Yetzeh. And that's why in Atzilus, the river that flows from there, meaning from Chochma. V'chol hamadreges in b'chinas achdus mamish. They're all in a very seamless, unified way. Now let's make this clear. Atzilus is a structure of 10 spheres. So you can't say it's like Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, for example, where there's complete seamlessness. But relatively speaking, as we've learned many times, in Atzilus, what dominates is not the structure. It dominates is the oneness. I gave the example, a simple example. Think of a healthy body. A healthy body where everything is functioning well. If someone says, are you made up of parts? You'll say, no, it's one body. Everything is coordinated. The circulatory system, the nervous system, the digestive system, everything is working in a very smooth, seamless way. So it's one organism made up of many parts. When do you start seeing distinction is when something is not working well. Then one part, you feel this, you feel that. You don't see that seamlessness is lacking. So in Atzilus, there's a structure, but every part of the structure, Chochma, Binah, Das, everything knows it's all part of godliness. Before the Tzimtzum, there's no structure altogether. In higher world, higher than Atzilus, I don't want to discuss right now, but it's earlier stages, you don't yet have full structure. So Atzilus is structure, but it's a structure that's a seamless unity, all like when we talk about the Ovis, Hein Hen and Merkava, the Ovis, 24/7, they were human beings. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they walked on this earth, but their whole being was completely a channel for godliness, a transparent example, a transparent channel for godliness on this earth. So Chesed knows it's Chesed of Hashem. In Beriyah, Chesed is already an independent Chesed. It's aware that it comes from Hashem, but it's already a Yesh, Bitl HaYesh. In Atzilus is Bitl Memetzias. He doesn't use that expression here, but it just helps to understand what he means by Achdus. So in Gan Eden, even though it's already in Beriyah, meaning it's already outside of Chochma, Yetzeh, nor Yetzeh Me'eden. The river Binah is outside of Chochma, but it's still under the influence of the unity. So it's like feeling that unified state. I mean, to just maybe give another example. When Chassidim would come Tishrei to the Rebbe, so among all the great experiences, one of the things that people experienced was that they came together from different parts of the world. Just like by the time of the Beis HaMikdash. The Jews came to Yerushalayim for Aliyah L'Regel, to the Beis HaMikdash. Many different people, but they felt they didn't feel the separation between them. They felt we're now all in this one unified whole, like Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, like by Matan Torah, one person, one heart. That doesn't mean that they lost their identities, but identities was not as significant because they're all here together celebrating with the Rebbe. Then each person at the end of Tishrei begins to prepare to go back home. So even when they come home, they still have the experience of that unity, of that joy, of that seamlessness. There will be a time, as time passes, where everybody goes back to their Ishtachas Gafne, Ishtachas Teinose. Everybody has their particular location to do their shlichus. So like I gave the example the other day, the chief of staff of the king, his job is to just get whatever the king wants done. But he has to communicate to the heads of each department. Treasury is different than military. Military is different than agriculture. Agriculture is different than commerce. Just to use a technical governmental infrastructure example. But the chief of staff, his job is to make sure that the king's will is fulfilled. Then there comes the breakdown. Each person has to do. Dira b'tachtenim means each of us has to do our job. I can't be doing your work, you can't be doing my work. That's already the period. That's why we need that. But Gan Eden is a state that's still basking, if you wish, and it's still under the influence of the Achdus that Binah is receiving directly from Chochma. And then will come the next stage where Beriyah becomes a world with different sections and different departments, namely 4 of them, which further break down and so on. So it's just a way of understanding, talk about interface. This is how you make a dir b'tachtein, because you want to join together diversity and harmony without compromising either of them. So Gan Eden plays a tremendous role here because Gan Eden is a combination. On one hand, it's already outside of Atzilus, but it's still under the influence of Atzilus. And that's what he's saying here. So when he asked the question, when he qualified, he said, Gan Eden, Meir Gil Atzilus, and he answered, yes, from Binah of Atzilus. But now we understand what that means. Binah, as it's united with Chochma. So to use a more maybe even more relevant example in this context, when you have the spark of an idea in Chochma, as we've discussed many times, on one hand, it's only a spark, it's only a nakuda, a dot, a flash, and very often it will dissipate very quickly. How many ideas do we have that come and go and we don't even remember them? If it does become developed, like very often you have an idea and you write it down, and then you go ahead and start fleshing it out. That means Chochma is now entered into Binah. So one of the key things to remember is that Binah should never forget the point of departure. This is very common in meetings, in business meetings, in strategy meetings, or even in writing. You come up with an idea, you start fleshing it out and developing it. At some point, you can go off the reservation altogether. I'm sure you've all been in situations where someone had an idea, then started being discussed, and at some point someone said, 1 second, how did we get here? We completely missed the point. And if you don't remember your point of departure, you can lose sight. Chassidus uses the expression, you go on derech aklosen. One of the things you see very often, how I try to stick to the script here, that even when the question is asked, and it's a good question, but not to make sure we're not going off on a tangent, which is important, but it's not this theme here. So you want to stick to the plot, so to speak, and keep your eyes on the prize, or else you can lose sight. Very easy to wander off in all kinds of interesting pastures. So what we're really doing is making sure that Binah keeps aligned with Chochma. If you don't keep it aligned, you can come up with great ideas, but you will not necessarily be fulfilling the initial concept that you visualized when the first Nakuda of Chochma came into your mind. So it's a constant process. The more Binah, the more care you have to take. And this is very common. As a writer, I can tell you, you start writing something, you get caught up in the writing, and then you start saying, 1 second, I think I lost my point. I've gone off very nice ideas, but like I've wandered off the reservation. And you go back to, okay, what's the title of I remember when I was writing Toward a Meaningful Life, I always kept in mind, every line I wrote, remember the book is called Toward a Meaningful Life. So whatever you write has to ultimately lead back to that point. That's like the Chochma. Binah is obviously all the chapters and all the details. So the idea of Binah being miyuchedes and Chochma is critical, not just for keeping honest, but also for the very truth of the idea. So essentially in Gan Eden, the Nod is still a single river. It's flowing, it's not Eden, pure Eden, meaning pure Chochma, because that's Tainug and that's beyond us. Like he said, it's a level that Ayin Lo Sholta Bei, we can't comprehend it, we can't fathom it today. Or he used earlier the expression with Chochma, he used an expression that is, I'm trying to remember where the Lashon was. There's an interesting expression that Chochma itself.
So Eden is higher than Chochma, correct?
Eden is Chochma. That's what he explained at length at the bottom of page 15. I just wanted to find where Mom says that. Pnimius Abba is Pnimius Atik. Oh, Shalei Nitn Lenes Klau. So that's Chochma itself. So Binah, the Nar, the river, receives, but you have to keep in mind, you want Binah to be attached to Chochma. And that's Gan Eden. Once you bring it down, let's say, to the students, then each student has to understand the idea on his terms. It still needs to originate from Chochma, But then the focus is on the different students, on the different kelim, on the different tracks. That's already when it becomes a Misham Yaparid and it breaks into 4 different tracks. But before you get to that, you want to make sure that the Binah is true and preserves the integrity of the Chochma. And that's what he's saying here. That Atzilus Abba Mekanno, and that's why L'chein b'Atzilus b'nor yetz v'chol ha'madregas in b'chinas achdus mamish. Shenikra elam ha'achdus. That's why Atzilus is called the world of unity. That doesn't mean there aren't levels. It means all the levels understand they're all part of one unit. Binah k'meshim yuchedes b'chochma. Li is the chochma b'chinas ayin. Chochma is the level, I'm continuing to read, is the level of ayin. In context of Binah, which Binah is like yesh. Well, lechein. So Binah like koyach ma. Because Chochma does not have ispashtus. It's like a yud, it's a dot. So its main focus is experiencing a reality greater than itself. So it's bittul. And that's why, since general Atzilus, we just said, Abba, Chochma, nests in Atzilus, harihu b'b'chinas yichud b'tachlis. So Chochma itself is definitely yichud. I mentioned the other day from chapter 35 in Tanya, Shemaiti Memoiri, that in Chochma you sense hu levade ve'en zolose. Because you're not sensing yourself. Like I explained, that Chochma is the idea that inyan nem dir, nish du nems dem inyan in Yiddish. It means the idea is absorbing you. You're not absorbing the idea. Whereas in Binah, it's I am understanding. So Binah is bringing it down already into fleshing it out and developing it. But Chochma itself is a state of ayin. Yichud b'tachlis. So now, I'll stop for questions in a few minutes. Let me just read a few more lines. Now he continues and says, "V'ikar hascholas ha'ishtalshelis u'mebchinas bina k'mesh kosav v'makam acher." So this is already alluding to something we learned earlier. He said that Chochma is higher than ishtalshelis. If you look at the bottom of page 15, he says, "Primis ha'chochma shalamayla mesed l'ishtalshelis." But you'll say the question, obviously, what do you mean? Chochma is the first of the 10 spheres. It's the beginning of Seder Shtalshlus in contrast to Keser. But everything is relative. Real Seder Shtalshlus begins in Binah because Binah is structure. Chochma is still the beginning, the first spark, but it's really under the influence, it's under the power of Keser, of Ayin, because it's sensing the deeper purpose, like I said, the higher reality. It's already touched Seichel, like I discussed at length in a few classes back. We spoke about the 2 levels of Chochma. Chochma as Seichel and Chochma as Bittel. Koyach ma. So I explained that Seichel really is God's way of giving us an ability for humans to experience something beyond their own ego. Animals don't have that. The rest of creation doesn't have that. So Chochma is a meeting place. Talk about interface, an interface between beyond Ishtalshlus and Ishtalshlus. So it's still called, the higher level of Chochma is called L'mayla Ishtalshlus. Where does Ishtalshlus begin to really manifest is in Binah, when you begin to flesh out and develop the idea. That's what he says in his parentheses. And now we understand the power of Gan Eden. In this manner, how Binah is experiencing Chochma, how the student is completely connected to his teacher. Not how the student is teaching it to his students, where there's already 4 tracks or different distinct levels. So in Gan Eden, what radiates is how Binah is receiving from Chochma. That's what Gan Eden is. So it's Binah, the Nahar, is irrigating Gan Eden, but the Nahar, Binah, is receiving and united with Chochma. So there's a higher level, Eden itself. That's higher than that, but that we'll discuss soon. But this is Gan Eden on its own. Okay, we'll stop here for now, and then I will continue after anyone wants to ask any questions or get any clarity here.
Didn't we learn before I mean a few classes before, that Eden itself is is higher than Chochma. He's like Kesser or something.
Go back to page 15, and he says, "No rubchinas bina ve'eiden rubchinas chachma."
But I remember I'm asking that we
Just go
learned
back there.
before
Read it. He discusses it directly. It's not my explanation.
because after all, Chochma is the
What
beginning
should I
of his
tell you?
Atzilus. I know that you said
We
about
discussed
Bitul.
it, Rab Shlomo, we discussed it for at least an hour in the previous class. Just go back to the bottom of page 15, read it, and if you need, listen to the class. The Rebbe Rashab directly addressed what you're asking me. Do you have the Sefer in front of you? Anyway, bottom of page 15, he says, Eidnu b'chinas chachma.
No,
And
I
then he
don't have
goes
the
and
Sefer.
says, Hagam shen is bar le'il, the Eidnu b'chinas tainu ga'atzmi, hanelam u'poshet sheba'atzmus ha'ir ein sof, right? Hine b'derech klal, zeh b'chinas chachma, b'chinas ha'pnimiyah sheba. Just go back. He literally discusses what you're asking me. So
Thank
yes,
you.
Eden is rooted in Tainuk HaPoshet, but it manifests in Chochma because Pnimius Abba, Pnimius Atik.
I had a
Okay?
question. I think Rabbi Teichel was
And we
finished.
discussed at length what that means. There's Pnimius Chochma, there's Chitzenius Chochma.
I had a question about the nature of the Nar, the river, and the analogy to water and the ocean in particular. So I guess you talked about that yesterday's class. I wasn't here, but this relates to the issue of period on the one hand versus unity on the other. Were you saying that the Nar and the river is the fact that say the Elikus is immersed in water is that the Binah is taking with it the Yichud, the unity of the Yud, or the sort of Aden is Binah is taking the unity of Aden with it as it irrigates the Gan in Beriyah. Was that the nature of that
Well,
metaphor?
he didn't discuss the nature of water here. This was not, he didn't explain water here.
I'm just saying your mushal. You're just saying your. I was trying to get to the point of that mushal demonstrates the point of the yichud, the portion of the yud of Chochma Ila that Bina, at least Bina of Atzilus, carries with it into Malchus and to irrigate the
he
garden.
just said, it's Bina miyuchedes b'chachma. That was the words he uses here. Right here on page 7, we just read.
No, I think that's why I'm asking you. I wanted to connect.
You ask me if Bina is connected with Chachma, the answer is yes.
Well, in that this here is essentially reiterating perhaps more precisely what you were talking about yesterday, I think. Yeah?
I mean, we learned this yesterday too. So
yeah,
I'm not sure
that's my question. No, that's you. You just answered the question. It's the same concept. Okay. I got it. That you answered my question and then some. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now, as usual, being that all these levels are all relative, the Rebbe Rashab now goes a step further. It says in Gan Eden, not only do we have Bina that's connected to Chochma, Yesh Lemer, he says, Yesh Lemer. Shagam Gili b'chinas Chochma Meir b'Gan Eden. That also, the Gili of Chochma itself also radiates in Gan Eden. Now, for those that are not familiar with the style of Chassidus Chabad, especially, this can always be confusing because we just said that it's Bina that receives from Chochma, and now he says Yesh Lemer that also Chochma. So I have to just reiterate that. Remember, we're not talking here about a cupboard in your kitchen where the spices are on one shelf and the cereal is on another shelf. That's in physical structures. It's either here or here. It can't be in two places at once. When you talk in Ruchnius, you don't have those tangible boundaries. So all levels are interconnected. We talked about microcosm, macrocosm, relativity. So it's just a whole different way of thinking that's much more abstract. And when you get accustomed to it, it becomes quite natural to understand it that way. But the first time you're exposed to these type of ideas, I know because I know many classes, people don't spell it out. So I wanted to just validate if you're having that confusion, it's quite normal because you're transitioning from thinking in tangible terms, which is what we're so used to in our sensory world, and thinking in more suprasensory terms. In other words, we're moving from the very tangible, concrete, to something far more amorphous, far more conceptual, if you wish. So if someone says, for example, where's Atzilus? So our first inclination is we look for it somewhere. We know where Mercury is. We know the sun. Then comes Mercury, and there's Venus, and there's Earth. There's Earth, and there's Mars, and then there's Saturn, Saturn, Jupiter, etc. So you think right away, okay, the world of Atzilus, where does it fit? Because that's our natural inclination. Because we think in terms of physical time and space. So it's good to remind ourselves from time to time that this is not physical time and space. Atzilus is right here where we are. And so is Beriyah, and so is Yetzirah, and so is us. And Gan Eden is here. But what does here mean? If I said to you, what's in this room right now? Wherever you're sitting right now, you'll see you have table, chairs, or whatever is going on in your room. You have objects, you have yourself. And then we'll say, okay, that's what you see with your eyes. What about the elements? We know, for example, water, if you have a cup of water, it's made up of hydrogen, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, which in turn are made up of different molecules, which in turn are made up of atoms and subatomic particles. And suddenly I'll say to you, so how many subatomic particles are in your room right now? Who knows? Trillions? More? So immediately you realize that there are many ways to look at reality. What Chassidus does is always talking to us about all these levels, spiritual levels that are existent right here. You don't need to go to the heaven for it. You don't need to go down deep into the earth. It's there. It's just different dimensions. So when you, for example, have an Atzilus moment, in this case, in this context, it would be complete seamlessness. You have a Beriyah moment, there's already structure. Yetzirah is even more structure. I'm not going to go now into all these different levels, but the point is, all these levels are really meant to give us a language of different dimensions of our own life experience. So there are people, for example, trained people, when they look, it's raining outside right now, here. So most of us, it rains. Okay, it's a nuisance. I need a raincoat. I need an umbrella, whatever. You ask a meteorologist, and they'll tell you the rain is a result of pressure systems, highs and lows, accumulation of the evaporation of the seas, accumulate in the clouds. You go a step further, you ask a biologist, they'll give you a chemist, they'll give you the biological and chemical, the map of rain and the forces behind it. And if you ask a Kabbalist, he'll tell you rain is gvuras kshamim. It's chesed shebegvura, or gvura shebechesed, I should say. It's amshach of chesed, mayim. All of them are true. It's just different dimensions. So basically, when we're learning this, we're learning what makes us tick. Instead of talking about the symptoms and the outer surface level of things, we're talking about what are the forces beneath the surface. And that takes training. That you don't suddenly, immediately assume that language quickly because we're so accustomed, we're actually addicted to very sensory, tangible concepts. That's how we think all the time. Throughout the day, we're inundated with stimulation of our senses, of what we see and hear and taste and touch and smell. So it's not a surprise that abstract concepts or these abstract levels are not easy to grasp. That's why when quantum mechanics began to emerge, was completely counterintuitive. Nobody could understand what does indeterminism mean. What does probability mean? States of probability. Everything was, once upon a time, everything was predictable. Cause and effect. And suddenly you're living in a world that's non-causal. So I just wanted to, what I'm saying now is a general introduction overall. I just felt when we're reading this to emphasize this. And I said from time to time, it's always important to remind ourselves that that's what we're discussing here. And you're not trying to fit this into our existing frameworks and perspectives. The opposite. What you want to do is allow Chassidus to expand your horizons and expand your way of measuring things and understanding things. And the more you do, the more you understand. So then when you meet somebody, I'll just give one practical Chassidus applied application. You meet someone and they're in a very bad mood. So our initial reaction, I don't want to be around someone with a bad mood. It's bad energy. They're making me feel, you stay away. But if a person's a little more trained, a little more sensitive, they see there's something going on. And you start seeing beneath the surface, behind the scenes, there's something happening to this person. And you say, something bothering you. I'm not saying the person will communicate, but you look with different eyes because you start realizing there's roots to every symptom. It's essentially a result of understanding the deeper forces at work. The more chassidus you learn, the more sensitive you become on that level. To me, that's always the litmus test. If somebody learns chassidus and they're not becoming more sensitive to deeper states of consciousness or super consciousness, something's wrong. Then they're just learning it, like I always say, mechanical. Then it's just a map, a geographical map. Okay, fine. The Atzilus is here, Beriyah is here, Ak is there, Tzimtzum is here. But if you do learn it properly, it has to increase your awareness. That you start becoming aware of things that you weren't aware before. So it's not a surprise when you hear, V'ahavta kamocha, love everyone. But you say, I can't love this person. They're obnoxious. They're antithetical to everything I believe. And then you hear that the Rebbe received everyone by dollars with a smile. No difference. What, the Rebbe was not aware that some people are more pleasant than others? But you see different eyes. You see the neshama. So even when there's something that may be negative on the outside, you see beneath the surface that there's a neshama here. Hashem put this person in this world. Fine, they may have challenges. There may be things that need to be improved. My point is, it gives you a far broader look. That's, in very general terms, what we're learning in Chassidus in general, and specifically where we are here. We're talking about, okay, that Gan Eden is experiencing Binah as united with Chochma. Lower level, Binah comes down into Beriyah, it will split into parts. So in a way, we're going back to the source where it's all united. And now he's going to say, V'yesh lemer. That's what triggered what I'm thinking right now, what I'm saying right now. Because it only says V'yesh lemer. I'm on page 17. Shagam gilib chinas chochma me'er b'ganei. So right away you can say, 1 second, you said it was Binah. And why are you only saying it's chochma? Because again, these are not tangible boundaries exactly. The Yeshlem is saying that if you go deeper, Gan Eden has also an element of Chochma, and he's going to explain what that means. But so that's why I've just felt time to time, as I said, to remind us of how we understand these different levels. So he says like this now. So again, the Rebbe Rashab is speaking to us as if we are not beginners. He's assuming we've learned. So it says in Beriyah Hazeir, Pasha Vayera. Beriyah Hazeir, as you know, is a sefer that the Mittler Rebbe published. I have my grandson here. I'm just telling him to lower the volume a bit. Okay. So in the Beriyah Hazeir, the Mittler Rebbe published it. It's the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe on Zohar that he would say Friday nights usually, and the Mittler Rebbe gathered them together. Then we have a Beriyah Hazeir from the Samach Tzedek, which is an explanation of the Mittler Rebbe's Beriyah Hazeir. So here's talks about Beriyah Hazeir. Here he's referring to, if you see in the footnote, 57, he says, Ladmur Amtsoi. But he also tells us to look at Beriyah from the Samach Tzedek. They go hand in hand. So what does he say there? On the Pasuk Vashem Pokad. So Pasha Vayera is the Pasha where we learn about Hashem Pokad. Hashem remembered Sarah, and that's when she gives birth to Yitzchak. So what does he say there in the Beriyah Azer? The Narhu B'chinas Yesod Abba. So till now, he said the river was Binah. There he says Nar is Yesod Abba. Yesod Abba literally means the sphere of Yesod within Chochma. So every of the spheres have all 10 spheres within them. Yesod Abba is a particular level that you'll find in Kabbalah quite common. It's the Yesod within Abba. What that means, I'll just give a little explanation. He doesn't explain it, what it means. Chochma has, when you break it down, all 10 spheres. There's Chochma within Chochma, there's Binah within Chochma. Yesod in general is hiskashrus, is bonding. If you recall from my book on Sfiras Eimer, explained Yesod as bonding. So in every one of the spheres, you need to have the element of hiskashrus. So Chochma is what gives, Yesod of Abba, of Chochma, is what gives Chochma its grounding a bit. So even though it's a spark, the Yesod will start connecting Chochma to Binah. It's still within Chochma. It's not Binah Sheba Chochma. It's Yesod of Chochma, but it's giving Chochma, like, let's say a teacher has an epiphany, a spark of a Chochma within him. The Yesod will be like the glue, like a foundation, that will bring that down, that he has to now express it. So it's not quite expressed yet, but it's the beginning of the expression of Chochma. So that's Yesod Abba Lefizeh. So based on what he says, that the Nar, and being the Rebbe Rashab is very thorough, so he says, based on this Beriyah Azer, now we have a deeper understanding of Gan Eden. Because then the Nar is more than Binah. It's now Yesod of Chochma. And according to that, Pirush Lahashkis Sagan, Hu B'chinas Binah. So now the Gan is no longer the Gan in Beriyah. The Gan now would be Binah. It's the Yesod of Chochma. Chochma would be Eden. The Nar now is Yesod of Chochma. And who does it irrigate? Binah. So in other words, when we go into more of the microcosm, like under a microscope, whatever we discussed earlier that referred to Chochma, Binah, and Gan Eden and Beriyah, now we're discussing in Chochma, Yesod of Chochma, and Binah. So now the Gan would be Binah. Another commentary on the Zohar from the students of the Arizal. Migdash Melech, Yisrei Daf Tzadik Amud Aleph. Like it says there he says the Gan is Binah. So now we have another way of interpreting the three levels of Eden, the Eden, the river, and the garden. And from Binah, through Binah, it also draws down into Malchus. And this is V'zehu Beis Heihin. This is the two Heys, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So the Yud is Chochma. The first Hey is Binah. The second Hey, the last Hey, would be Malchus. And what do they refer to? The La'avda or L'Shamra. So La'avda or L'Shamra, which is when Adam was placed in the garden, it says to serve and protect. Both words, it doesn't say Laved or Lishmer, it says La'avda or L'Shamra with a Hey at the end, hinting to the two Heys of Binah and Malchus. So bottom line now, we're talking in Atzilus, we've now identified a level of Gan Eden. When you break it down further. So let's continue till we'll finish the paragraph. V'yesh leimer, the Meir Gilizeh de HaMalchus Gam B'Gan Eden Elyon de Beriyah. So that's as it is all in the root in Atzilus, like you could say in the engine room. But the Rebbe Rashab now is saying that those levels in Atzilus, through Malchus, it now radiates into Gan Eden Elyon and Beriyah. Because remember, the fact that we have the level of a Gan in Atzilus still doesn't mean that's Gan Eden Elyon. Gan Eden Elyon still resides in Beriyah. So he's saying from the so-called subtle or sublime Gan, which is Binah, receiving from the river of Yesod Chochma, Yesod Abba, from Chochma, from Eden, now it transmits into Gan Eden Elyon and Beriyah. So now in Beriyah we have we have the Gilui of not just Binah as it unites with Chochma, but also with the river of Yesod Abba. So you have more of a Gilui of Chochma than according to the original explanation that we learned till now. So it's obviously not a contradiction. He's just adding a whole other dimension here. So let's just continue, and then I'll stop the question. Beriyah Azer Shami adds now in the parentheses, and that Beriyah Azer from the Mittler Rebbe Samach Tzedek, he says the Zeh b'chinas yichud pnimi de Chochma Binah. That this is referring to an inner unity. There's an outer unity of Chochma Binah, there's an inner unity. I know these are all new concepts that you probably haven't heard before, at least not in Samach Vav. So they need explanation, and I'll explain them. But let me just read the language, then I'll discuss it. So it's a yichud pnimi of Chochma Binah. So because we're talking, all this is within the inner dimensions. Now what he said in Tanya before, the ziv, the reflection of the Teira and Aveda of Neshamis in Gan Eden Elyon is receiving from this yichud pnimi of Chochma and Binah. V'zehu biyud, end of parentheses, v'zehu biyud nivra elam haba, and this is what Chazal say, and we learned this in the previous mimer at the end, that with the yud, Hashem created elam haba. Elam haba is referring to Gan Eden. The yud is Chochma. B'chinas keitz hatachton the yud b'chinas Yesod Abba. So in the Chochma itself, in the yud itself, if you magnify a yud, you'll see there's the body of the yud, but on top there's a keitz elyon. It's like a point at the top, like the tip of the yud, and there's a keitz tachten. It looks almost like a drop. And a keitz tachten, when a yud is written properly, it's not just a dot. You break it down, there's a keitz. And the keitz tachten of the yud, that's Yesod Abba, the Yesod that brings Chochma into the hay of Binah. So now we have, within Chochma itself, you have all these levels taking place. So now we've elevated the experience of Gan Eden, that it's actually drawing from deeper levels within Chochma itself. Yesod Chochma, to be precise, is the river that receives from the Eden of the Yud itself. So it's a little Kabbalistic, a little very dense, condensed, and a little dense. I could unpack it a bit more, but I wanted to first read it, see if there are any questions, and then I'll hopefully explain it more.
Is this explanation that you just gave the more refined explanation through the Kabbalah or the Beriyah Zohar by the Rebbeim? Is this a more detailed, refined explication of the general concept above it that Binah is partakes of, or has the yichud with the yud with Chochma Ilah, or is it a different perspective? Is that slicing it a different way?
I thought that was my whole introduction to explain exactly that question. It's like everything, when you say there's Atzilus within Beriyah, and then there's Atzilus within Atzilus. All the levels play themselves out, microcosm, macrocosm, throughout Seder Shtalshlus. So what the Rebbe Rashab is doing, based on the Beriyah Azer, that says that the river is Yesod Abba, not Binah, he's saying we can find all these levels that we discussed now a bit higher in Chochma itself. Now, you may find somewhere where it says that in the Keser, there's a level of the river. Binah within Keser. I'm not saying it says anywhere, but then we would basically apply this. That's why I gave the whole introduction, that we need to be able to think not in tangible.
No, I understand that. I hear you. I'm. That's not the thrust of my question, but I think you answered it. So, can I ask a follow-up, please? Unless someone else has another question. But
yes, I have a question. Gan Eden, with all of these high levels, it's still in Beriyah, not in Atzilus. Correct?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Gan Eden, even the highest level of Gan Edens, even though that is connected Binah in Yesod Abba, but still Gan Eden itself is real, not in Atzilus.
Gan Eden is Beriyah, yeah. But like just like we talk about the 10 hidden spheres, they are the root of the revealed spheres. Gan Eden is rooted in the Gan of Binah of Atzilus. That's essentially how it works.
From
So
this point,
everything has roots in higher levels, but the actual manifestation of Gan Eden Elyon is generally Beriyah. Yeah.
it brought me to the point that Moshe's neshama was from the world of Atzilus. Is that why he couldn't speak and the Chochma prevailed on Binah in him?
It's another discussion which I don't want to go into right now because he doesn't discuss it here.
The Alter Rebbe is saying it in Torah Oil, that's why he was
yeah. Yeah, but I don't know if he connects it necessarily to Atzilus. I think there he connects it more to Alma Diskasim Minamayim Mishisihu.
Yeah, he's talking about Shemitah Rishono. We are now in Shemitah Shniyah.
That's why I'm saying it's a discussion of its own, which I would suggest simply looking up in the indexes.
Just to understand more tangible.
This is a perfect example of what I said before. There's what Samach Vav talks about. What you're talking now is something you're aware of. But not everyone in this class necessarily has that on their mind. That's why I'm saying it's a fair question, but I would suggest go look that up where it's discussed. It's not discussed here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
My follow-up question was going to be, because this Kabbalah is so esoteric, I mean, in general, the dissection of the relationship between Aden and the Gan, is there a way, like a Chassidus applied, we can take these concepts beyond your overview about how to understand Elokus in general, which I thought was extremely eloquent and helpful, but beyond that, something a little bit more balabatish, if possible.
I did that yesterday. I did it a little today. That you have to find the Gan Eden within your own personal life, where we have a special moment that's more than just a regular routine. Like Gan Eden could be connected to Shabbos compared to the weekdays. You just have to identify a state of higher spiritual consciousness and awareness in your own life, and that you can associate to a Gan Eden type of experience. I gave many examples of that in the previous classes.
Yeah, today, no, I listened to it. I listened to it.
So each of us has to just find something, a more elevated state. Basically, Gan Eden is a more elevated spiritual state. In comparison to, we'll call it the routine. About this specifically, Yesod Abba and so on, I'm not ready to do that right now. In the Chassidus supply, that's a whole other, needs a little more, much more explanation of what exactly Yesod Abba is and Chochma. But suffice it to say, what I described, the overall, is that if you want to personalize this, you have to find examples of it in your life and see if you can then identify the different levels. It's not going to be that easy to do, because for many of us, just the exercise of moving from a material way of thinking to a spiritual way of thinking is already a big achievement, and it is. And then to start to understand, in other words, Gan Eden in Asiya is already bigger than what we usually do. Then to understand Gan Eden in Beriyah, and then to understand the Gan in Binah and Yesod Abba. So you're talking about higher and higher states. So I would begin with something that you identify with, that you relate to, and then see, can I identify a deeper spiritual conscious state? But I wouldn't jump. It would be very difficult to do that. That's one of the challenges in teaching Chassidus of this caliber, is all these levels, can each of us learning right now find every level within us? Hypothetically, yeah, but it's going to be extremely difficult, because I would just suggest find one of them. Find one spiritual parallel in your life to Gan Eden, and one spiritual parallel to Beriyah outside of Gan Eden, and I feel that would already be success. Then, once you do that, then you can start climbing and going further. That's the challenge here, that we are learning many levels, and most of us cannot, however, achieve all those levels in one sitting. It's going to take time. Even what I mentioned the other day about davening, 4 stages. Just going through one davening, one day, you're going through Asiya, Yetzirah, Beriyah, Atzilus, in Birchas HaShachar, Psukkah de Zimra, Shema, Shemoneh Esrei, that itself can be quite a marathon. One day. So often I will tell someone, if you can even go in davening from Asiya to Yetzirah, I would be very happy if a person could do that. To go all 4 every day is going to be quite difficult unless you really become trained. It requires conditioning.
Hello.
Obviously, we learn about it and we try our best. But I always mention, you say that several times a day. Tell me if anyone here has achieved, last time you said Shema, you actually experienced 3 levels of love. Not just words, 3 actual different levels of divine connection. It's not simple. If we reach one level, is quite an achievement. So that's the challenge here. In other words, in concept, we should probably learn a few lines, and then spend the rest of the month working on the avodah of those lines before we continue. But I don't know if people are ready for that.
Thank you. It was very helpful response to my question.
Rabbi Jacobson?
Yes.
So I can't help but to draw upon my own personal experiences of the first time I had Yechidus, and probably an experience shared by yourself and by many others, and how we referred to a Gan Eden Atachton and a Gan Eden Ha'elyon, and the perceptible change in feelings that when you went from the outer lobby at the 770 into Gan Eden Atachton, and as you stood by the door and put your hand on the doorknob and then entered into Gan Eden Ha'elyon, how perceptible these changes were experientially, and I'm sure that would
That's
help.
very well said. Very well said.
Yeah, help people understand this. And this is, if you wanted an Atzilus experience, it would be standing before the Rebbe in front of his desk. I mean, it's almost, and I hate to use these new wave expressions, but it really was for myself and for many people that I knew, really an out-of-body experience. And that's the best way if you wanted to physically document the concept that you are trying to drive home in Avoda.
Very well said. Let me just say this for everyone here. In the Hasidic tradition, Gan Eden Elyon was referred to the room of the Rebbe where you went into Yechidus. And Gan Eden Atachton referred to the room outside of the Rebbe's room, like the antechamber where people waited before they went in. So, but I would respond to you, I think what you brought up is excellent practical application, but there are 2 challenges here. Number 1, can you replicate that today? Or you're just a distant memory? And number 2, I'm saying that also to myself, not just to you. And number 2, how do we explain it to someone who'd never had that experience? That would be important. So there's no question. That's why I brought before the example of Tishrei by the Rebbe. The Rebbe was no question an example of a higher spiritual state. When you're in the presence of a person like that, you actually, you felt a higher state of consciousness. There's no question about it. So that helps a lot. But what do you do today if you don't have that quite? So I would say, listen, when you learn a mimer from the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Rashab is with us right now. If you learned it properly, this should be lifting us up to a different state of consciousness than we will after we close the Sefer and we move on in our day today. So what you're saying is no question requires more. That's why I said, if it really done right, we would spend months on the Avodah before we move on to the next level. Here we're flying from Lifnei Tzimtzum and the Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu, and we've gotten to Atzilus and Beriyah, and now Yesod Abba and the Kesed. I mean, how many levels have we discussed here? And have we internalized any of these real levels in our Avodah? I would say I haven't. I mean, I'm more familiar with doing it, it would take real work. I would, I have to do that. It takes time. It's much easier to read the lines than to experience them. But I'm very glad you brought that up. And I think it deserves plenty of conversation. This is maybe what a Farbrengen is about. So I am constantly struggling with this issue when I teach, because I know that all this only comes alive when it's personal. Even though it's beautiful to learn and it's brilliant and eloquent and it really gives you a picture of the cosmos, not in any way minimizing that. But I know really coming alive is when this becomes your life. And that is not easy to convey in an hour class every day without stopping and having to really talk very personally, and each of us expressing our experience like you just did with the Yechidus and so on. So I just want you to know that is I'm not saying a frustration, it comes with the turf, but it is a challenge. I'm keenly and acutely aware of it all the time. Just, you should all know this.
I can say that Yechidus, when I was 18 years old, was 53 years ago, and it's only now that I'm really working hard each day to try to implement in actuality that experience and the lessons and the advice that I received at that time. And it's taken a long time.
I got you.
Yeah.
For whatever it's worth, all the work I do, including this class and other programs that I do and everything, is by me. That is, so to speak, unpacking the yechidus that I had with the Rebbe. And by me, it was even more than that. I was writing the Farbrengens for so many years. So I re-experience Atzilus, Beriyah, Yitzir, and Asiya when I teach, when I write, when I counsel, when I speak with people. So that's how, and I think all of us, when you do it in your shlichus, if you can, when you communicate with others, with your loved ones, the strangers, whoever, in a deeper spiritual way, you are basically expressing, whether it's Gan Eden Elyon or Gan Eden Tachna or Beriyah or Yitzir Asiya, that needs to be defined. But that's what you're doing when you are serving. And that's one of the easiest ways to do it, because you're actually helping others. And in the process, you're not focusing on your ego and self. You're focusing on your shlichus and your mission. And in doing so, you are manifesting higher states of divine consciousness. Let's be honest. If any of you take any ideas you just learned or learned in previous classes, and you have a conversation with someone today or tomorrow or tonight or Shabbos or whatever, and it lifts up a spirit that is empowering and inspiring, you have brought Gan Eden to earth, to be very frank.
I recently heard that someone was talking about the nature of shlichus, and that the Rebbe said, everyone that leaves my office is a shliach. And I found that simple saying empowering.
Absolutely. Before I conclude, anybody want to comment on what we're discussing now? Anybody has any questions or comments?
Yeah, I'd like to ask about Lavda L'Shamra, and the Yichud of Chochma and Binah, Lavda, and the Yichud of Yesod Abba and Malchus in L'Shamra. I was wondering if that correlates what we learned in Ayin Beis about the two Yichudim in Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad, the two Yichudim there. Is there any discussion of that? Is that something that correlates?
I probably wouldn't equate it with that, because there it's Yichud Tata and Yichud Elah. Earlier in Ayin Beis in Volume 3, he actually had a long discussion of the difference between Zivug Pnimi and Zivug Chitzeni, Yichud Pnimi, Yichud Chitzeni. I'm going to talk about in the next class more, because I didn't really elaborate on those few words. I just read it. But I would associate it more with the two, not Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, even though you could probably connect it. But if you don't mind, the next class, I'll try to elaborate a bit more on that.
Are there any Maimorim that discuss those two
Of
terms?
Course.
That's really something.
Oh, L'Avda L'Shamra?
Yeah,
that I don't know. L'Avda L'Shamra, I have to look that up. I'm not sure.
Okay.
He brings here footnotes. If you look,
61.
Yeah. 61. He brings it from the Bechaye. Rabbeinu Bachai is the one that actually says it. And he says to look in Eira Teira. So I would just go to those notes. That's what I would look up first and see where that leads you.
Orator is it Samach Tzedek?
Yeah.
Okay.
This whole piece is the language of the Samach Tzedek, more or less.
Great, thank you. I thought it was very special.
It is fascinating that Rabbeinu Bechaya, that was about 800, 900 years ago, that was before Teras Atzilus. But
yeah, he brings premise as Rabbeinu Bechaya. We know brings Sayyid Shabbatera. He was a Makubal.
What's his most famous sefer, Rabbi Bechaya? The Bechaya.
Rabbeinu Bechaya ala Teira. That's what it's called.
Rabbeinu Bechaya.
He made the Teras Alatera, like you have the Ramban.
Yeah, he's a contemporary of the Rambans, I think, right? Something close to that. He quotes the Ramban, I think. There's a lot of similarities.
I think in about the same time, about.
Yeah.
And last question is, your discussion earlier about the conceptual Atzilus, and you want to look for some place where it is, and it's just conceptual, and it's different dimensions, and they're present where we are. I was wondering, it seems to be like there's three things which is not like that, which is Gan Eden. Gan Eden is a spiritual world, but it's also a physical. It was unique, maybe, that it was a physical location in this world, and I was wondering also about the Mishkan. How we say
I spoke about this.
No,
the Gan Eden, the physical Gan Eden,
yes,
definitely was a physical place with the four rivers.
That's what I mean.
I have a bunch of articles that I wrote in search of Eden, of what happened to Gan Eden, the physical Gan Eden. But we're talking here the spiritual Gan Eden, the one that right now in the Shamas resided. He's not talking about the physical one necessarily.
Right, but I'm just
what makes you to feel that it has to be a physical Gan Eden also?
But Pshut Shamikra, that Adam Achava, what makes you think Adam Achava were physical human beings? And they were placed in the Garden of Eden with trees, and there were four rivers, Euphrates, rivers that are, we have those rivers. There's an identification of Gan Eden. Chassidus has Maimorim, there are Maimorim that ask what happened to Gan Eden. Yes. Where is Gan Eden today?
Wow, it must be in Galus.
Well, I wrote a bunch of articles on this from these Maimorim. Yeah.
My Meaningful Life, right? Your website.
Yeah. Just look for Search of Eden or go to the AI, we'll give it to you immediately.
And but I wanted to make a point about that. Gan Eden is a physical and a spiritual. The base of Mikdash is that we say there's a physical base of Mikdash, Shlomo Melech's, and also the Asili Mikdash, the Mikdash spiritual one that's in each of us. And I was wondering if it also the Torah. Torah is a spiritual entity, but we also we were just laying the Torah today. It's a physical
everything in Tanya, everything in the physical world evolved from the spiritual dimensions. That's a given. Everything.
Right.
Down to every fiber of existence evolved from a spiritual state. Some of them are right now only spiritual and not physical. Some are also physical. Some are in between. They're different levels.
Right. Oh, that's interesting because of what the comment of Feivel just said about Atzilus. We normally think of Atzilus only spiritual, right? It's only a spiritual entity. But he was just saying how he experienced Atzilus in the Rebbe's room. So maybe it is also...
No, you can have Atzilus experiencing it on Earth, but it's still an Atzilus experience. But it's a spiritual experience that he experienced in the Rebbe's room, not a physical one.
It's not a physical.
No, it's manifested in physical senses, but it was a spiritual experience in physical garments. Let's put it that way.
Right. I was trying to make a distinction that there are certain things that only are spiritual, and you can't relate,
I don't see a difference between spiritual and by me, soul and body. Tell me, is your soul spiritual or physical?
The soul?
Yeah.
The neshama? I would say it's spiritual.
Yeah, but what about right now? You're speaking, you're looking, there's manifesting in a body. So is it a physical experience or is it a spiritual experience?
It goes back to the interface.
Okay, it depends how you use it. But it is a Oir and a Keli. Look at it that way. Okay, we'll stop here. Okay. End of the paragraph at the bottom of page 17. I'm going to stop the recording.